Well, it's typical me when I do these recordings. It's not the first time I've done this. I forgot to say today's in two parts. So welcome to part two. And this is just a bit more sort of application stuff, really, as we work through some final things about prayer. Well, I hope what you've found so far to be of interest to you, and it's sort of whetted your appetite a bit in regard to praying and perhaps praying more and more effectively. But if we were to examine how Jesus prayed, I think the first thing to note is that he always called God Father. Matthew 6 would be a classic passage, which includes the Lord's Prayer, of course. In there, he always said, Father. So I think predominantly we should address God as Father in our praying. Second thing, I think if you examine Jesus' teaching on prayer, there's quite a bit in there really about asking for what we need. That's not to say that worship and other things aren't part of it, of course, and we'll get to those things probably in weeks ahead. But asking your Father for the things we need, not necessarily what we would want, but what we need is a very important thing. Keep on asking, knocking, seeking. Luke 11 would be an example of that. Jesus also talked about praying together as a group, and that phrase, when two are or three are gathered in his name, Matthew 18 verse 20. So there's the group praying. Obviously it doesn't mean restrict it to two or three, but the point being is that when we're together in his name in agreement, then amazing things can potentially happen through prayer. So that's the group side. But here's something else. Jesus also taught about praying alone. Now that shouldn't surprise us because lots of us obviously pray on our own. But what is notable, and this may not necessarily be everybody's cup of tea, what is notable is that when Jesus said about praying on our own, actually involves praying out loud. Now that's the thing that might not be everybody's cup of tea. But why do I say that? Well, Matthew 6 to 7 reads as follows. When you want to pray, go into the room, shut the door and pray. Do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. So, bearing in mind the words babbling, words and heard, I honestly don't think anybody could conclude that babbling words and heard are silent versions, praying them in quietly in your mind type prayers. These are out loud words. And if I'm honest, I can't really find many references in the Bible about silent prayer particularly. That's not to say we are not allowed to pray silently, of course, but I'm just saying there is an emphasis in the scriptures on out loud prayer. And here's the thing, for those who struggle to pray out loud publicly, perhaps in a house group or with friends or in a church service, for those who struggle to pray out loud publicly, I hope it's okay to ask you this. Do you ever pray out loud on your own? Because you see, if you struggle to pray out loud on your own, the chances are you're going to struggle to pray out loud in front of other people. Sometimes we've got to get used to hearing our own voice. And when we do, it's not such a frightening, kind of intimidating thing if we use it publicly. So, I suppose I should say, on a personal note, I very rarely pray quietly in my mind these days. I stopped doing that a long time ago, and I'll tell you why. Because when I pray out loud, I can hear myself declaring truth. I can hear myself proclaiming things. I can hear myself actually speaking properly to my Father in heaven. And in doing that, it somehow enables me to, if you like, I'm believing more what I'm already believing. Because I can hear myself voicing truth, it somehow seems more real. And I know somebody who has been a Christian many, many years, and they're in their 70s, and only recently they decided to start praying out loud. And basically they said they wouldn't go back to what they were doing before. It's changed the way they pray just to pray out loud. So I think that's the important thing. And also, praying out loud does another thing. It stops those wandering thoughts that I think we all get when we just pray in our minds. So it's something to try, something to practice. And may I say rather amusingly, I tend to walk and pray because I'm not very good sitting in rooms because I find that a distraction. But I was caught once praying out loud when someone was the other side of the fence, and I think they thought, hey, that chap's a bit crazy. So you've got to be careful when you do it, where you do it. But I often go down open spaces where I can see, like Pagham Harbour, and I can pray freely there because I know it's an open place and I have some great times down there with the Lord. And there's things he shows me, I think, that are also helpful for subjects like prayer today. So in closing then, for today, the Lord has given us the gift of prayer, and the Father is open access to the Father through Jesus by the one Spirit. And because of that fact, he calls us to be a prayerful people. I think two of the biggest struggles churches have is 1, prayer, and 2, outreach. And isn't it funny that the two things the enemy doesn't like is a praying church and an outreaching church? I find that an interesting correlation. So we've got to pray and we've got to outreach because things are really important and they are something we have to do. Things we've got to put into practice. So believer, you have been born of God. Believer, you are a saint of the Most High. Believer, you are salt and light in and through Jesus, and your life is still hidden today with Jesus in God. He calls you a prophet, priest and king in his Son. You are elect, chosen and predestined and alive to Christ and alive to God and 100 other truths. Surely then, if this is true, then if anyone in the world who can pray, then it's you, my friend. So do we believe this? Do we actually believe we can pray? Do we believe that we're even meant to? I believe the scriptures are clear. So then for me in closing, I'll say this. Prayer is for me not an art form. It's an expression of your heart. Prayer is not about getting all the words right. It's about you spiritually before God who is Spirit. Prayer is about praying from your heart and with your heart, freely speaking to Father in heaven and moving in that. And it's about listening. It's about waiting for any response that he might give and going with that. So it's not about the words per se. It's not about getting your words just so. It's about not so much what you're saying, but how you're saying it, how you're praying it. And in all honesty, truly, I would rather have someone pray just 2 words that were from God and in God, rather than listening to someone going on with hundreds of words which have just come from themselves. Prayer is about those things. Many years ago now, I was involved with some mission work just for a couple of weeks during the summer period. And I went to a particular church as part of that, somewhere in London. And I remember I was in this prayer meeting and this man, he kept praying. I'm not criticising the praying per se. What he was saying was really, really good. But he was so dominating, so domineering. Hardly anybody else could get a word in edgeways, and everybody else basically felt so second rate to him. The truth is, was what he was doing real prayer? Was it deeply spiritual? I'm not saying it was, I'm not saying it was, it's not for me to judge. But what I am saying is it's the spiritual depth from within that counts, whether it's 1,000 words or 2 words. So be free, my friend, to pray, because the Father truly is waiting for you. So let's go with how he leads in everything, and certainly in prayer, because this is where it begins and where it ends. Glory to God today. Amen. Thanks for your time.